We're going to use our switch virtual interfaces now to do some inter-VLAN routing. And this logical interface, whether you call it the switched virtual interface or the switch virtual interface, exact same thing, SVI, you're going to want to do a one-to-one mapping, if you will, between your VLANs and your SVIs. One VLAN per SVI, one SVI per VLAN. And I'm sure you remember the management interface that's on layer 2 switches by default. And that's interface VLAN 1. Remember that? Got to learn that right immediately when you start your studies. Well, the thing is, that's actually an SVI. We just didn't tell you what it was at the time. You had enough to do. It's the only default SVI, though. Now, we can create an SVI for any VLAN we have, and creating one, it's just like creating a loopback interface. Exactly like it. You go into config mode, you create it, give it an IP address, you're done. Now, in this lab, we're going to actually create two SVIs, and this will allow our host to communicate even though they're in different VLANs and part of different IP address spaces. So before that, we'll go ahead and send a ping between the two. We've got host 1 at 2111/24. It's in VLAN 11. We have host 3 at 3111/24. It's in VLAN 33. And our multi-layer switch, which is switch 3 from our previous lab, still numbered that way. It's connected to those hosts using their host number. So host 1 is connected to fast Ethernet 0/1 on the switch, host 3 to fast Ethernet 0/3. I have also already put these hosts into their VLANs. You know how to do that. We made it an access port, and then we just put it in the VLAN. And you can see right here, nothing up my sleeve, that port 1 is in VLAN 11, port 3 is in VLAN 33. That's exactly what we wanted. Let's go over to host 1, and we're going to try pinging 3111. I have a feeling this is 10 seconds of our lives we're not getting back. And that's about right. So let's go on over to host 3, and we will try pinging 2111. I have a slightly different setup here than I usually do, so that's why I'm fat fingering some numbers there. Yeah, that's why. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So we're not getting anything there. We don't have connectivity, so we're going to fix that by creating our first two SVIs. And for that, we're going to go over to the switch. I love that because you can see that the interface went up and the line protocol changed state to up. And what I love about that is that tells you that you had a port on this switch that was already in that VLAN that was operating correctly, that is up physically and logically. You have to put the ports in the VLANs first. There is a little bit of an order to this one. If you create an SVI and you don't have any live ports in it, the SVI is going to show as down. It's going to show as line protocol down. It's kind of puzzling. It's like, well, wait a minute, it's logical. How can a logical interface be down? Well, with these SVIs, you have to be careful, so it's a good little mental checklist for you to have. Put your ports in the VLANs first, then create your SVIs. And let's go ahead and we'll create our second one. And I'll wait for the message. There they are. And that's it. You can verify your config the same way you would with a physical interface. Just do a show VLAN 11 here, and you can see same information that we've been seeing. And also, a good thing to note here, notice hardware is Ether SVI. Love that. But you've got your MAC address, you've got your IP address, everything else you would expect to see. And we'll go ahead and run that for 33 as well. Hardware is SVI, it's up, and line protocol is up, and that sounds good to me. Now, let's go ahead and do a show IP route. Now, what I wanted to tell you was this. On this particular switch, IP routing was enabled. It's disabled by default. So let me show you how to turn it off, and then we're just going to turn it right back on, and you'll see the difference immediately. Now, this IP route looks kind of familiar. So let's do a no IP routing. That's actually how you turn routing off on the switch. That's what you're going to get if IP routing is not enabled. You're not going to see, it's not going to let pigeons loose. It's not going to give you any messages that says you don't have IP routing turned on. It's just showing you don't have anything. So again, on a multi-layer switch, IP routing is disabled by default, and what you've got to do is just enable it with IP routing. That way you get to see how to turn it on and how to turn it off. Very simple stuff. So we've got our routing table. Now we need one more thing. When we're using SVIs, our hosts must have their default gateway set as the SVI representing their VLAN. That is, of course, the IP address assigned to that. So we've got to do a little default gateway work out here. We know how to do that on a PC. We know how to do that. If those of you who work with Macs know how to do it on Macs. But we're using Cisco routers here for our hosts. So do you remember, and I'm sure you do, how to create a default route on a Cisco router? It's IP route and then all zeros right there, the first two values. Then we're going to put the IP address of the SVI representing this host VLAN, which in this case is 20.11.11. We got to finish the job, so we're going to go over to 3. And there's 30.11.11. So what do you think? 1 and 3, our host devices have their default gateway settings. We have our SVIs configured. We have them set up. We've tested everything. Let's go back over to 3 and give it a moment and see if it can ping 20.11 now. And there we go. Let's try that again. Okay, glad we saw that. I've seen this when you're first pinging with an SVI that you brought up, is that of course you might get 1 or 2 timeouts at the beginning of any ping, then everything's fine. The U was a little unusual, but you can see now it's going right through. Let's go ahead over to 1 and see what we get. First we get a grossly misspelled ping. And there you go, it's perfectly fine. So that's it. That's all there was to it. Creating the SVIs. We did that right here. I've got one more illustration for you. There are the 2 SVIs we created on the multi-layer switch. Checking the routing table, remember, IP routing is disabled on a multi-layer switch by default. Turn it on with IP routing. If you need to turn it off, just use no IP routing, of course. And then go to your host devices, put the default gateway setting in that you need, which is the SVI representing their VLAN, the IP address we put on there, and you're gold. That's all there is to it. Now we also have the option of configuring a physical port as a routed port. It's also called a layer 3 port. You might want to look for that term as well. Now we assign an IP address to a routed port the same way we do to an SVI, but routed ports are physical interfaces, SVIs are logical interfaces, and routed ports do not represent a particular VLAN as does an SVI. Here's the network we're going to use in the next lab. That's going to be on the next video. We're going to have some EIGRP thrown in there. If you're rusty on EIGRP, don't sweat it. It's the basic network command, and that's about it. But we do need a routing protocol in this situation. So during the break, I'm going to remove everything we just did except for the VLAN memberships, and we will go from there. I'll see you on the next video. We'll configure some layer 3 ports.